think he'll change. He is committed to his own level of service, and that will remain true.
The royal world is reeling as a shocking revelation emerges from the man closest to Princess Anne. For years, he has remained silent, watching the power struggles play out behind palace doors. But just moments ago, he revealed a secret about Queen Camilla so dark that it could change how the public views her forever. What cracks will this revelation expose? And why did it take so long for this secret to come out into the open? Join us as we uncover Princess Anne's husband's stunning revelation about Camilla's darkest secret: the age-long rift. Imagine two royal women tied together by family, yet worlds apart in character, and the result is nothing short of constant tension with a simmering history. That's the essence of Princess Anne and Queen Camilla's relationship. Their story has never been one of warmth or sisterly closeness. Instead, their relationship has been marked by suspicion and rivalry that still echoes through the years. However, the discord between Anne and Camilla didn't emerge overnight. It had been simmering for decades and began with a tangled romance in the 1970s when Andrew Parker Bowles and Princess Anne started a relationship. Though they never married due to royal restrictions around Andrew being Catholic, there was genuine affection between them. And when Camilla and Andrew reunited and married in 1973, Anne reportedly found it difficult to warm up to seeing the woman who married her former lover around at Buckingham Palace. But then Camilla didn't stop there. She went on to marry Anne's brother, Charles, 32 years later. Those early entanglements left a bitter taste in Anne's mouth. According to insiders, Camilla appeared to be intimidated by Anne's presence for years afterwards. But while she found Anne's demeanor hard to cope with, Anne completely ignored her. Fast forward to the coronation of King Charles, where Camilla began to prefer being referred to as simply Queen, rather than the traditionally prescribed Queen Consort. If there was anything to make Anne snap, it would be defying protocol. And so she bluntly declared that Camilla was not Queen, but Queen's consort. Tensions began to flare between the two women, and even though they later made sure to show politeness whenever they were outside, it was clear that they only did so to maintain royal decorum. Years after her relationship with Sir Andrew Parker Bowles ended, Princess Anne met Sir Timothy Lawrence. Soon, they tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony, and it is Sir Timothy who would later discover the darkest secret of the monarchy. But who is Sir Timothy, and what secrets were hidden behind the palace doors? The last straw. Sir Timothy Lawrence has never been a man easily rattled. He was a Vice Admiral of the Royal Navy before marrying Princess Anne, so he carries himself with the discipline of a person who had spent a lifetime at sea. Since stepping into royal life in 1992, he has rarely sought attention. His role has always been simple: protect Anne, support the monarchy, and keep clear of palace intrigue. Yet by 2025, Timothy found himself standing in the middle of it, unable to ignore what he was witnessing. For years, he had watched from the sidelines as Camilla's presence grew in the royal household. At first, he dismissed Anne's biting criticisms as her natural, hard-to-please personality. However, as time passed, Timothy noticed a troubling pattern. Camilla's behavior was not just irritating, it seemed calculated, like each move was another step in a climb. And once he began to put one and one together, it began to make sense. Of course, there was the history with Camilla's romances and how they slowly led her into the palace, especially how her affair with Charles helped unravel his marriage to Diana and sparked a public scandal that nearly destroyed the monarchy. Not only did it lead to Charles and Diana's divorce, but it also inadvertently led to Diana's death. For Anne, who valued duty and family above all else, these betrayals were unforgettable, and she believed that Camilla was unfit for the role she had claimed. especially after Andrew privately told Timothy that Camilla had ignored her children and instead inserted herself into Charles and Diana's marriage. But this was just the past, and while she had remained committed in her marriage, Timothy realized that there was more going on in the present. Ever since Charles's health began to falter, Timothy noticed a change in Camilla's posture. It was subtle, but in meetings and family gatherings, Timothy realized that Camilla had dropped the supportive consort act and began to speak on behalf of the king. She inserted herself into conversations about the Regency Act and succession planning, acting less like a companion and more like a monarch-in-waiting. Her habit of giving unsolicited advice to William, and especially Kate, lecturing them on their roles, struck Timothy as presumptuous. To him, it looked like overreach, and to Anne, it was infuriating. But perhaps the most personal insult was how Camilla managed Charles's time. Under the guise of protecting his peace, she increasingly limited visits from family members. Anne would return home frustrated after yet another cancelled meeting with her brother, blaming Camilla for shutting her out. Even small family gatherings at Clarence's house seemed to be reduced, with Anne often left off the guest list. Yet, that wasn't all. Timothy also noticed Camilla's corrosive way with words. She would tell Charles, "Anne is so busy with her horses and charities, she doesn't understand the pressures of real leadership like we do." To courtiers, she'd confide worries about William being too modern, as if casting doubt on the very man who would inherit the throne. When these comments are filtered, they are seen for what they were: attempts to poison the well to position Camilla as the king's only reliable ally. Finally, there was the media. Timothy couldn't miss the glowing headlines that began appearing. These are like Camilla's steadfast leadership, the Queen holding the monarchy together. These articles praised her strength while barely acknowledging Anne's decades of service or William and Kate's growing responsibilities. To Timothy, it was a transparent campaign crafted by Camilla's allies to elevate her above the rest of the family. And Anne's fury over these stories made it impossible for him to ignore. Each of these things weighed on Timothy. Alone, they might have been tolerable. Together, they formed a heavy load of suspicion and distrust. And then came Royal Ascot, 2025. The air buzzed with celebration. The horses, the crowds, and the flash of cameras. But behind the polished spectacle, King Charles sat pale and frail, his energy visibly fading. Standing nearby, Timothy overheard Camilla lean toward an advisor and whisper, "This throne must remain in my hands forever, no matter what happens to Charles." The words froze him in place. A chill coursed through his veins, more cutting than any winter storm he had weathered at sea. For the first time, he saw Camilla not as a difficult in-law, but as a direct threat to the king and the crown. Timothy knew he had to act fast, and so he began to search for answers. What would he find, and what would it mean for the future of the monarchy? The double-edged sword. Behind the gilded walls of Clarence's house and Buckingham Palace, whispers often die before they reach the public. But this secret was Camilla's darkest and most dangerous truth, and was too venomous to remain hidden forever. Sir Timothy soon realized that what he had heard was more than a fleeting remark, but a power plan of years-long deception. Timothy had uncovered a double-edged sword designed to keep King Charles bound to the throne, while ensuring Camilla's grip never loosened. Ever since Charles's illness, his health had become a matter of grave concern within the monarchy and amongst his people. He had barely ruled for 3 years when his health began to fail him, and once he started chemotherapy, his once confident presence was replaced with a frail and weary front. To outsiders, it seemed like the natural toll of illness. But behind the curtain, something far darker was at play. It turned out that Camilla was allegedly pressuring the king's personal physician into a disturbing compromise. The demand? To deliberately reduce Charles's chemotherapy dosage. Not enough to kill him, but enough to keep him weak, dependent, and incapable of ruling with authority. a monarch still alive, but too frail to challenge her dominance. The cruelty of it was staggering. According to the shocking evidence, Camilla made her intentions chillingly clear. Keep him alive for the cameras, but weak for me. If you slip, if you speak, I'll ruin you and your family. This wasn't the voice of a grieving, supportive wife. It was the calculation of a woman determined to wield unchecked power. And the doctor, who was cornered by threats to his career and family, had little choice but to comply. If the medical manipulations secured Camilla's control of the king's health, the second part of her plan targeted something even more personal: Princess Anne's financial legacy. Weakened both physically and emotionally, Charles was being pressured by Camilla into signing a set of power of attorney documents. On the surface, they looked harmless, like routine papers. But the truth was devastating. The documents would have illegally transferred control of Princess Anne's charitable funds and inherited assets, resources entrusted to her by the late Queen Elizabeth II and supported by the sovereign grant, directly into Camilla's hands. For Anne, these funds weren't merely numbers in a ledger. They represented decades of loyalty and independence. They financed hospitals, community programs, and equestrian charities that meant a lot to Anne. By stripping them away, Camilla wasn't just enriching herself, she was robbing Anne of her identity and legacy. Camilla reportedly blackmailed her husband emotionally by playing the role of the suffering spouse. She insisted that securing her financial safety was the king's duty, and for a man riddled with guilt and worry, he had no choice but to give in. So how did this dangerous web come to light? It wasn't Sir Timothy's suspicions alone that exposed Camilla. It was the bravery of a terrified man. Edward Thompson, a low-ranking servant at Clarence House, had long witnessed the whispers and threats that swirled around Camilla's private dealings. For years, he stayed silent, fearing the consequences. But when he saw her threaten the king's doctor with words as sharp as a blade, he knew silence was no longer an option. Edward secretly recorded the exchange on his phone, hiding it in his jacket pocket as his hands shook. That single act of courage turned him from a silent observer into the unlikely custodian of the monarchy's survival. When Sir Timothy received the video, he felt what he later described to confidants as a cold punch to the heart. It was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was undeniable proof that Camilla's ambitions had crossed into dangerous, even criminal territory. For Sir Timothy, the discovery was both a burden and a mission. To hold the truth meant carrying the power to shatter the monarchy or to save it. The stakes were higher than ever, for this was not just about Charles's health or Anne's finances. It was about the very soul of the crown, a symbol that millions across the world still revered. And yet, as heavy as the secret weighed on his conscience, Sir Timothy knew this was only the beginning. If Camilla was bold enough to manipulate doctors and coerce the king himself, what else might she be capable of? So he took a bold step and decided to tell the king all about it. But how would Charles react when he receives the news that an enemy had been sharing his bed for so long? A broken king. When the truth finally reached King Charles, it struck him not like a single blow, but like a series of shattering waves crashing over a frail body. His heart sank, not only because of the betrayal, but also because of what it revealed about his own blindness. For decades, Charles had fought to legitimize Camilla in the eyes of his family, the church, and even the nation. Against public outrage, he had stood firm, insisting that his love for her was unshakable and true. To hear that the woman he had defended with such stubborn devotion had been causing his weakness and his very downfall was almost more than he could bear. Memories came flooding back with a bitter sting. He recalled his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose face had been etched with quiet disapproval whenever Camilla's name arose. Right from the moment he had introduced her to their wedding, where Queen Elizabeth had avoided taking pictures with the couple, the Queen had always made it clear that she simply tolerated Camilla. At the time, Charles believed it was simply the conservatism of an older generation, reluctant to accept change. But with this new revelation, her judgment loomed over him like a prophecy fulfilled. Perhaps his mother had always known. Perhaps, while he had refused to see it, she had sensed in Camilla that she was not a partner bound by love. Charles thought of the months he had spent in his sick room, weakened by chemotherapy. He remembered how Camilla would sit beside him, her hand on his, whispering words of comfort. How many of those whispers had been lies? How many of her gentle touches were nothing more than fake emotions? The realization hollowed him out. His body had been failing him, but his spirit had rested in the belief that his partner stood loyally at his side. In one moment, that illusion had been destroyed at once. Yet the personal betrayal, as devastating as it was not what weighed most heavily on him. What haunted Charles above all was how the rest of the palace would bear this news. His children, his sister, his advisors. They had sacrificed for him. They rallied around him. And now, because of his choices, they would have to carry the shame of this scandal. For a man who had spent his life preparing to be king, the crown felt heavier than ever before. And for the first time in his reign, Charles wondered whether he had the strength or even the right to continue wearing it. But how would his successor handle this new scandal? The final verdict. Prince William's reaction was immediate and explosive. Although he was normally the picture of restraint, the future king's composure shattered when the video of Camilla's threats was played before him. As he listened to her voice, that dripped with malice, his face drained of color, and then flushed with a rage he could not contain. To him, this was not merely a scandalous overreach. It was an attempt at assassination by a slow, cruel poisoning of his father in the pursuit of power. William's anger gave way to purpose. Rising above shock, he assumed control of the situation with the steady authority of a man born to lead. He insisted that this was no longer a private matter between family members, but also a legal crisis that demanded swift and ruthless justice. Armed with all the irrefutable evidence he had obtained, William took charge of the proceedings. But if William's response was fury, Anne's was heartbroken. The usually stoic Princess Royal, who was known for her iron will and unshakable composure, broke down in tears as the evidence unfolded before her. They were not tears of weakness, but of raw, furious sorrow. The kind that only a sister could feel watching her beloved brother so cruelly manipulated. She painfully recalled their mother's final wishes concerning her financial independence. She ensured her daughter's charitable funds and assets were secured against misuse. Now, to see Camilla try to steal that legacy away was unbearable. Then her grief hardened into resolve. Standing firmly beside William, Anne offered context that no lawyer or advisor could provide. With anger in her voice, she began to state the historical and emotional weight of their mother's will, and the clear illegitimacy of Camilla's financial maneuvering. As the case was presented, the Royal Council, made up of senior advisors, lawyers, and a few trusted confidants of the late Queen, listened in silence. For 3 tense hours, they debated the legal and political consequences of the evidence. Could such a revelation ever be made public? Would exposing Camilla risk shattering the monarchy's already fragile image in the modern world? But the evidence left no room for doubt. Even the most cautious advisors admitted the truth that if Camilla's conspiracy were allowed to continue, it would not only destroy Charles, but unravel the crown itself. One by one, voices of hesitation fell silent, and by the end of the debate, the room was united. Camilla would be stripped of all executive duties and financial control. Every charitable fund, every asset she had tried to seize, would be restored to Princess Anne and placed under the joint oversight of Anne and William. From that moment onward, Camilla's role would be reduced to a hollow shell. She'd become a purely ceremonial figure and queen consort only by name. The council also made one last decree. It was that this scandal was never to reach the public. The monarchy's survival depended on secrecy, and to admit that the queen consort had conspired against the king might raise questions of how fit the king really is. So it was decided that the truth would remain locked within palace walls. All was settled, except the fact that Camilla was oblivious to how much her life was about to change. How does a conspirator queen react when she finds out that her secret was exposed? The downfall of a queen consort. When word first reached Camilla that her secret had been uncovered, one would expect that her reaction would be fear and remorse, even if faked. However, her reaction was nothing of such. Instead, the walls of Clarence's house shook with her furious voice as she paced the room like a cornered animal with her hands trembling and her face contorted with rage. She had spent decades climbing and carefully placing herself at the very heart of the monarchy. The thought of losing it all in one sweep was unthinkable. In her desperation, she made a reckless move that revealed the depth of her panic. She summoned one of her most trusted aides and gave a chilling order to eliminate Sir Timothy Lawrence. She blamed him for everything, for prying where he should not have, and exposing what she had hidden so carefully. But the assassination plot failed before it even took shape. The attempt was clumsy and was intercepted before it could threaten Sir Timothy's life. When the attempt was discovered, it only reinforced the council's resolve that Camilla was dangerous and unstable. When news of that failure came back to her, panic began to affect her composure. The palace that was once her stage for manipulations now felt like a prison where every gaze looked like a threat. She paced endlessly through the corridors with her mind racing with impossible scenarios. She considered ways to claw her way back and silence her enemies, but each idea dissolved into the same conclusion that she had been beaten. Little did she know that something far colder was coming. It came delivered in a simple envelope that was embossed with the seal of the Royal Council. The seal meant serious business, and with trembling hands, Camilla tore it open and began to read. The words were mercilessly written in the impersonal language of law and order. Her executive powers were revoked and her influence stripped. She would remain queen consort only in title and no recognition beyond the ceremonial. As her eyes traced the sentences, her face drained of color. Witnesses would later recall how she sat silently, gripping the paper so tightly that it tore between her fingers. She had fought for decades to be recognized as Charles's rightful partner, to ascend to the role she believed was hers by destiny. Now it is gone. All of it. The letter slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. For a long moment, she simply sat there, staring at nothing. Then the odd tears came. She sobbed not with grief for Charles, or even for the family she had fractured, but for herself and for the dream that had died. Later that evening, when she stood before a mirror, the woman who looked back at her was unrecognizable. She no longer saw a queen, but a wrinkled 78-year-old woman with empty eyes. And by night, Camilla's defiance had collapsed entirely, and she shut herself away in her rooms, refusing visitors. The palace that had once been her throne became her cell. Her dream of power had not only slipped through her fingers, it had turned to ash. She was not banished to a distant exile, nor cast into public disgrace. Her punishment was worse: to live out her days in emptiness, imprisoned in the very palace she fought so ruthlessly to control. Even though her crimes deserved jail time, her punishment was worse. She had to live out the rest of her days in emptiness and sheer contempt by her family. And so Camilla's story ended in defeat. Her life's wicked ambition had shattered completely, leaving only an old woman staring at her reflection, wondering if she had ever truly won anything at all. Do you think that the council's decisions were adequate for what Camilla did? If not, what punishment do you think is more reasonable? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.